ولكن لنتحدث عن مقالك، ترتكز في هذا المقال على شيئين: مصدر صحفي واحد، وكلام الرئيس الأمريكي بايدن حول إمكانية الولايات المتحدة بتدمير نورد ستريم، وطبعا هذا مسجل للرئيس بايدن. هل هذا كاف كي نتهم الرئيس بايدن والCIA ومعرفة النروج بالموضوع، وأنت معروف عنك أنك معلم التحقيقات الصحفية؟
Well, I did what I did. Obviously, I thought it was enough, but people like me, I've been doing this for 50 years, writing stories without naming people that who tell me the information because you couldn't do it otherwise. Won a lot of prizes for my reporting, and I wrote stories negative about the CIA and negative about the war in Vietnam and negative about the president. And I think if I wrote 800 stories, 795 of them had no source. They were just one source told me, or a source said. You can't do the kind of work I do by naming people, because then you won't. You have to protect people, and that's the most important thing. And so this story I did on the pipeline was just like 100 stories, 1,000 stories I've written. I don't name who tells me things, but there are people in America, in the foreign policy offices, in the State Department, in the government, in the military, who there are these wonderful people who take the oath of office, but they have to take every year, and they take it not to their boss, not to the colonel or to the general, and not to the president. They take it to the American Constitution. And when you have people like that in the government, those are the people I get to talk to, and I have to do everything I can to protect them. But we will, this is a story that about the pipeline bombing that will not go away because there was no reason. The only person that had any reason to bomb it was the people who did it. My president authorized the bombing, and I describe in great detail in the first story I wrote. I wrote it for something called Substack. It's a new thing here in America where you can publish yourself and not have to deal with sometimes very timid editors. I use the same, because I've been around a long time, I use the same people who I work with when I work for the New York Times or for the New Yorker magazine. I also have written a lot of interesting stories for the London Review. And one of the editors I had in London now lives in New York, and he's my editor on these stories. And at the New Yorker magazine, there's a very famous tradition of fact checking. You have to, almost every sentence has to be checked. And one of the better fact checkers I worked with for years at the New Yorker is retired, but he's now working for me. So I basically have a little newsroom going. I have an editor who's quite good and very tough on me. I have a fact checker, and I have a means of putting it out. And on Substack, which is a subscription thing. Everything is subscription these days. I sort of hate it, but so what? Here I am. And so I stand behind what I wrote 100%, of course. And so here we have Putin that we don't like. We don't like Putin, Vladimir Putin of Russia. He's not a communist anymore, but he's a very aggressive man, and he's not letting us do what we want to do in Ukraine, which is to recreate a nice, wonderful country that's going to be pro-West on his borders. That's not what he's going to want us to do. So we have a problem. And the new government gets in, Joe Biden, and Jake Sullivan is his national security advisor, and Anthony Blinken is his foreign policy advisor. And their way of dealing on foreign policy is to point fingers at people and say, you're not doing what we want. They're very aggressive, very hostile to Putin, very hostile to the Chinese. My Secretary of State 3-4 weeks ago, Tony Blinken was supposed to fly to Beijing to have a very important meeting with his counterpart, the foreign minister of China. And a balloon came by, and he canceled it because of a balloon. I mean, that's where we are. And we're always very argumentative, and we always talk about rules-based order. And the truth of the matter is, we're not the power we used to be. China is much more influential. China convinced Sunni Saudi Arabia to deal with Shia Iran. And out of that emerged a new partnership and a new world. And I think I think the Chinese will soon start buying. They buy a large amount of oil right now from Saudi Arabia. They're going to start buying in yen. So we're going to lose the dollar business we've had to control. It's amazing. Things are happening which get the America out of the mainstream, which I don't think is such a bad idea.